Hello students, this is Priyanka ma'am here and let's today deal with the first chapter, life processes. So the topics which are going to be covered are of course the introduction as to what are life processes, nutrition, the types of it, autotrophic and heterotrophic. These two are already done in class, I believe, but let's just recap, whatever we have learned. Along with that, we are going to mainly focus on autotrophic nutrition in terms of photosynthesis in plants, the role of stomata, stomatal transpiration, and finally, the factors that are affecting photosynthesis. So, yes, the basic process in a living organism which is necessary for maintaining life is termed as a life process. And this maintenance happens whether we are moving, resting, or even sleeping, or even doing a rigorous physical activity. So, during all this time, basically a process which together performs the function of maintenance of life. They are collectively called as life processes. So we've already given you the notes also regarding this. But some terms which you need to recall in this particular chapter. This is a huge chapter, let me tell you, students, and we are going to deal with it part by part. So for that, these terminologies are repeated many times in the textbook also. So what are biochemical reactions? They are chemical reactions that are taking place during certain vital activities. And when you look at metabolism is nothing but whenever you perform a physical activity, let's say you are doing a rigorous workout or probably you are even sleeping, whenever you are doing a particular physical activity, whether it is very rigorous or whether it is very dormant, at the same time there are simultaneous chemical reactions that are taking place in your body also. So the total of physical and chemical changes that take place in the body of an organism is termed as metabolism. And what is a metabolite? A metabolite is referred to as a substance that undergoes various changes during metabolism. This question was asked in the board exam, that name any two metabolites. Now students were not aware of what is a metabolite itself. So I've given you two examples of metabolites, carbon dioxide and water are two examples of metabolites in the process of photosynthesis. So they are the substances that undergo change. So anything that undergoes change is referred to as a metabolite. Hope this is clear. Okay, now what is the criteria to define that something is alive? If a living organism undergoes all these life processes such as nutrition, transportation, respiration, excretion, reproduction, and for that matter, even digestion or metabolism, what we say, that time an individual is said to be alive. In unicellular organisms, all these life processes are carried out only by a single cell, and in fact, it is carried out by the process of diffusion. Okay, so I'll repeat that. In unicellular organisms, all these processes are carried out by diffusion. Forgive me for the touch thing, but yeah. In multicellular organisms, we have well-defined organ systems which are present to carry out all these processes, which we are aware. We have the respiratory system, the circulatory system, reproductive system, digestive system, and so on. So that's how all these life processes are carried out successfully in our body. What is nutrition? The process of acquiring food that is needed for nourishment and sustenance of the organism is called as nutrition. So something that is for nourishment and sustenance. Okay, that is called as nutrition. There are two types of nutrition, autotrophic and heterotrophic nutrition. We can see heterotrophic nutrition is further divided into holozoic, saprophytic, parasitic, and mutualistic. As the term suggests, autotrophic nutrition or holophytic. I have used this word holophytic over here. So autotrophic or holophytic nutrition is seen in organisms who prepare their own food from simple inorganic substances. So they simply do not just prepare it on their own, they prepare it from simple inorganic substances. Such organisms are called autotrophs. Example, green plants, some bacteria. And I must say, green plants, of course, utilize the solar energy to prepare their own food, whereas some bacteria derive their nutrition by chemical energy. So whatever chemicals are present in their surroundings, they usually absorb that and they are able to prepare their food. So such organisms are called as chemoautotrophs. So that's for your information. Chemoautotrophs are those that prepare their own food using chemical energy. Heterotrophic nutrition is the mode of nutrition where organism derives its nutrition from other organisms, and such organisms are called heterotrophs. Make sure that when a question is asked as to what is heterotrophic nutrition, if I ask this question, you will answer that the mode of nutrition. You're not just going to write organism derives its nutrition from other organisms. No, you are going to start your sentence by saying the mode of nutrition in which organism derives its nutrition from other organisms. So examples are fungi, insectivorous plants, animals, and of course man. Let's look at the types of heterotrophic nutrition. Already we have dealt with this. I'm just revising it, so I'll go a little faster. Holozoic nutrition, wherein the organism feeds by ingesting the solid organic matter, like in our case, and it's later on digested and then absorbed in the body. Saprophytes are all those which feed on dead and decaying or matter, and parasites are those who obtain nutrients from living organisms, and they obtain their nutrients by living inside the body of an organism. Examples are given over here itself. So already again, as I said, notes have been given. This is something which I would like to definitely mention. Mutualism is a type of symbiosis in which populations interact to benefit both species. Now, there are different types of interactions. You would have heard of commensalism, you would have heard of amensalism. Out of all this, mutualism is an interaction for the purpose of food. Okay, so for the purpose of food, because we are talking about nutrition, I would like to say that mutualism is important, because let's take the example of this particular insect here. Now this particular insect acts as a pollinating agent for the flower, but in return this insect is getting its nectar, okay, from the flower, and that's how its food, it's getting its food because of mutualistic relationship. Let's look at this particular bacterium. We have already learnt about the bacterium. Yes, it is rhizobium. Rhizobium is the bacterium which lives in root nodules of leguminous plants. Now here bacterium is not getting any food, but the plant is getting benefited because it is getting its sufficient amount of nitrogen compounds which is required for the plant to grow very very effectively or efficiently. So the plant gets its extra, what you can say, its extra booster food because of the presence of this particular rhizobium bacteria. In return, of course, the rhizobium gets a place to stay and gets basic nutrients from the soil also. So that's the reason why this is again an example of mutualism. So far it is asked only once, long back in probably it was in 2001 or 2002, wherein there was something that was asked related to insect pollination and about rhizobium in this regard. So that's why I thought I would like to mention this particular example also. Yes, again another board exam question. Autotrophic and heterotrophic nutrition, the differences are asked. Usually it is a 2 mark question which is being asked for it. I have given you, if you can say, I've given you 1, 2 and 3 criteria. Okay, very rarely they could ask you this for 3 marks, but always remember for a science paper, the valuation goes like this. Especially for biology subjects, it's always like this, that there's always a half mark allotted for the answer. Every keyword is half mark. So if I say it's a 2 mark question, they would have asked you maybe any two you can write, two differences, and you are it's like half mark, half mark, half mark and half mark. So automatically you will, it's going to be like it's basically like this. So whenever it's a 3 mark question, you are expected to write 6 points. Whenever it's a 2 mark question, you are expected to write 4 points. So make sure that you keep this in mind whenever you are answering. So these are the differences which is already, we've already discussed these things. I thought I'll once again put it across. Please note down all these notes. If anything is missed out, if something is extra in this PPT, please note it down in the notebook. So, coming to our main topic for today, autotrophic nutrition, which is nothing but photosynthesis in plants. Now, if somebody asks you what is photosynthesis, yes, we have been learning photosynthesis right from standard 3 probably, and we always say that, yeah, it's the process by which plants make their own food. Okay, that's great. Now, you can't write this answer for a 10th standard board exam question, which is also asked. So, what is your definition of photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process by which, I would say, autotrophs, or if you would also like to say green plants, that's also fine, or they take in substances from the outside, convert them to into stored forms of energy. This is very important. Stored forms of energy. And this material taken is in the form of carbon dioxide, water, which is converted to glucose in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. So this is very important, that the reason why autotrophs take in substances from outside is to convert them into stored forms of energy, and glucose is the classic example of the stored form of energy. Again, another question: give an example of a stored form of energy in the body of a living organism. So the stored form of energy, students, is nothing but glucose. Keep that in mind. I think I will erase all the thing and I will just highlight this. So glucose is nothing but a stored form of energy. Now it can also be, one more example what you can give me is not only glucose, there can also be, yes, there can also be glycogen, or even you can also say starch. So glucose, starch, or even glycogen can be stored forms of energy. Yes, glucose is stored temporarily in the body of a human being. We will discuss this when we do respiration topic. Okay, that's when we're going to discuss. So coming to our topic here, the chemical equation of photosynthesis, you need to remember, we know in the carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll, this must be written, gives you glucose, oxygen and water. Keep in mind one main thing. I always encourage students, along with the chemical equations, you please write down what it is. What does each of them, represent? For example, yes, this is oxygen. Again, forgive me for my writing. The touch is not coming properly, although I tried to practice several times. So please make sure that you write the names of all of these, whether they are reactants or whether they are products. Please write down the names of it below it. So another question, why is photosynthesis essential? Photosynthesis is essential because it produces food for all the organisms on earth. As we are aware of the food chain, and we are all dependent on plants itself for our food. So that's why photosynthesis is important. And also it helps to release oxygen, which is again a life supporting gas. Okay, now photosynthesis is divided into two stages: light dependent and light independent reaction. And where do they occur inside the body of a plant? If somebody asks, yes, I can write leaf. Yeah, that's right, absolutely right, leaf. But I don't think as a 10th standard student you should write leaf as the answer. You will have to write it occurs in chloroplast. And that too, where does it occur inside the chloroplast? It occurs either inside the thylakoids or it occurs inside the stroma. So that's where you are going. Stroma is nothing but, yes, the fluid which is present inside the chloroplast is called as stroma. So you can say your light reactions takes place here. And why do we call it dark reaction? Again, students, do not misinterpret that, oh, light reaction means it's occurring only in the daytime, dark reaction is occurring in the night time. No, 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 it's not like that at all. Well, light independent reaction, or what we call dark reaction, happens just in the absence of light. That's it. It can take place whether light is there or light is not there. It doesn't matter. So that is the reason why we call it as a dark reaction. Actually, these terms, light reaction, dark reaction, had come up when I was studying, maybe in, maybe seventh or eighth standard. That is when these terminologies came. And by the time I reached 12th standard, that is when, maybe the terminologies changed in our textbook, and they said, no, let's not call it light and dark. Let's call it light dependent and light independent reaction. So that is how, but still in our NCERT textbook, whether when I was studying or even you are studying, you can see the mention of light and dark reactions, which are, mentioned somewhere or the other. So that's why I have retained it. But for your information, again I'm repeating, light dependent reactions are those which exclusively take place when light is there. That's it. Whereas light independent means whether light is there or not there, these reactions will certainly take place. So let's see what happens during photosynthesis. Raw materials for photosynthesis. For photosynthesis to take place, a plant requires carbon dioxide, which we know. How does it enter? It enters through the stomata. Stomata are tiny pores which are present in the leaf. We look into that more detail later. Apart from that, we also know that yes, when you water a plant, again, that water absorbed by the root hairs is carried by the xylem vessels. And this xylem transports the water where? It transports the water to the leaf. So water enters from the roots, goes up to the leaf, and this is the site where your photosynthesis will take place. So apart from this, once the sunlight falls on the leaf, we know immediately chlorophyll is activated. Chlorophyll, which is present inside the chloroplast, gets activated and immediately starts to split the water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. This is called photolysis, and photolysis is the first step of photosynthesis. I am repeating this point. Photolysis is the first step of photosynthesis. This is how photosynthesis begins. Even if you put a plant outside in the sun, even if you water the plant, if the plant does not have chlorophyll, you will not find photosynthesis taking place. That is the reason why photosynthesis occurs only in green plants. Again, I am repeating, photosynthesis occurs only in green plants. Why? Why? Because only in green plants chlorophyll is present, and chlorophyll will absorb the light energy from the sun to split the water molecules and start the process of photosynthesis. So let's look at it much more in detail. Yes, this is the equation I'm going to keep, so you see here, this is the main starting, I can say the starting element, which starting molecule or compound, let's say compound, the starting compound which begins your photosynthesis reaction. What are the steps involved? Number one, as I said, chlorophyll gets activated by absorbing photons, and then immediately water is split. So two molecules of water in the presence of four photons will release hydrogen ions, electrons, as well as oxygen. So this is what begins. Now your hydrogen ions immediately go and they activate another molecule which is called as NADP. What is this NADP? NADP is called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. I'll repeat, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. This is usually in an inactive form present in the chloroplast itself. Immediately once your hydrogen ions get released by water, they activate your NADP to produce NADPH2. You may ask me, what is NADPH2? NADPH2 is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphohydrate. That is what is NADPH2. Okay, and immediately the moment NADPH2 is produced, why? What is it necessary for NADPH2? NADPH2 is immediately going to start producing your ATP. ATP molecules will start getting to produce. How? Why? What is the connection? Immediately the formation of ATP will be activated by ADP. So the minute NADPH2 is produced, ADP gets activated. ADP is going to bind with one phosphate and produce ATP. I hope everybody knows the full form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate is called energy currency of the cell. So it's energy currency of the cell. That is what ATP is famous for. Please remember this particular point. So I'll repeat once again very quickly. Number one, chlorophyll gets excited or activated once it absorbs the light energy or photons. Energy of 4 photons is enough to split 2 molecules of water into hydrogen ions, electrons as well as oxygen. These hydrogen ions are immediately going to activate NADP. NADP is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate to produce NADPH2. NADPH2, the moment NADPH2 is produced, immediately ADP gets activated to bind along with one more phosphate to produce ATP. If you ask me from where did this phosphate come, the moment NADPH2 is produced, along with it, several phosphate molecules are produced also. You are not going too much into detail of it. That's why I also don't want to, go into too much of detail. But remember, a lot of phosphate groups are present in the stroma also. You can see over here also, we have mentioned it, it's mentioned also over there. So it's already present, but it just needs to get activated. So this activation process is what is very important. So that's how our light reaction begins. The moment ATP is produced, it starts moving to another set of reactions, what we call dark reaction or light independent reaction. So now our water molecule has got split. That part is done. What is left? Left over is carbon dioxide. That is why dark reaction is called as a carbon fixing reaction. Why is it called carbon fixing reaction? Because your carbon dioxide now is going to undergo several changes and it is going to produce the 6 carbon compound which is called as glucose. Okay, so that is what it's going to do, and it's possible only due to the presence of ATP. ATP is going to make sure that your carbon dioxide gets converted into glucose. Again, I am saying there are a series of reactions that takes place, and in fact it happens in a cycle which is called as Calvin cycle. You can see it's mentioned Calvin cycle. You are not learning it so much in detail, so I also don't want to go into the depth. But please remember, the ATP which is produced out of our light reaction, that is going to make sure that your carbon dioxide is going to get converted along with the split water molecules. It's going to produce your glucose. So that is very, very important. And after the formation of glucose, you can see water molecules are produced. Oxygen was produced where? Oxygen was produced during photolysis. Look at the previous slide. You can see oxygen is already produced over here. So don't think about oxygen anymore, that it is produced in dark reaction. Dark reaction is only going to produce the extra water as well as your glucose. So apart from this, you can see here ADP will get converted back. So ATP gets converted to ADP and NADPH gets converted to NADP plus. So these are the changes that takes place, and then the entire process is a cyclic process. So that is how the process will continue. I hope it's clear. Coming to the stomata, now we all know that there are small holes present in the leaf surface in the epidermal layer. In fact, for monocots, stomata are present more on the lower side of the leaf. Okay, so stomata are present on the lower side of the leaf in case of monocots. Even in case of dicots, the lower side, of the leaf only is where stomata is present. Okay, and I think you should be knowing why stomata differs. I'll repeat again, monocots have got stomata on both the surfaces, up and down. Okay, whereas dicots have got only on the lower side, and lower side has got more number of stomata. Can you guess why? It is to avoid excessive transpiration. That is the reason why stomata is always present more on the lower surface of the leaf. What happens if more number of stomata is present on the upper surface? Sometimes it so happens if the temperature goes really, really high, excessive transpiration can take place. That's the reason to avoid this. Nature itself has created, stomata in this particular way. Yes, functions. very important, always asked. Functions of stomata: helps in gaseous exchange when? During photosynthesis. Many times students will just write, yes, it helps in gaseous exchange or helps to absorb water and all that. You're making very general statements. Please be very specific. Gaseous exchange when? During photosynthesis. Helps in transpiration, that means loss of water from the aerial parts of the plant. So basically this is what happens in cave. That is why stomata is very important. We know the structure of stomata. It's made up of two guard cells, as you can see over here. And yes, it also has got chloroplast and cell wall, vacuole and nucleus. There is, the opening is called as stoma. I hope you are aware of this. It's called stoma. If you don't know, please remember this. And the stoma usually opens during daytime and closes during nighttime. Yes, you have already learnt in ninth standard about turgid, flaccid, swollen and shrunken. So I'm not going into details of that, because we know that only when the cell is in a turgid state, the stoma can open, and the stoma closes because the cell is in a flaccid state. So that is what happens. Now, coming to the most important aspect called transpiration. I'm taking this topic immediately after photosynthesis because they're somewhere related and it's all related to plants. So I thought let's finish this off before we go into digestion part and all that. So there are different types of transpiration: stomatal, cuticular, and lenticular. Now, if can somebody like think about where is this cuticular transpiration important? Yes, we all know leaves have got an outer layer which is called cuticle. It's a waxy layer called cuticle. Then why doesn't this cuticle perform any kind of transpiration? Well, cuticle does perform transpiration for certain of the plant species, and also in the plants when they are just small saplings, when the stomata is not yet formed. In such cases, you will see cuticular transpiration is seen more. And on the other hand, when the plant becomes really, really old, when the leaves are, almost probably when they are shedding also, or even in certain plants, when during shedding of leaves, how is it that the plant still survives? Because lenticular transpiration takes place. I'm repeating this point. When plants become old, when the leaves become really old, when stomata becomes sunken, when it's almost closed, or during shedding of leaves in certain plants, how is it that the plant or the tree at that time, we call it usually in trees, it is seen, why is it that, or how is it that the tree continues to survive? It survives because of lenticles. Lenticles are nothing but minute openings in the stem, and such transpiration is called as lenticular transpiration. So you can keep that in mind also, usually seen in woody stems. So coming to stomatal transpiration, yes, this is what I was mentioning. Usually stomata are present in the lower surface in case of dicots. Rose and banyan are examples, but mostly in case of monocots, maize and grass, you can see it's present on both the surfaces. And we already spoken about the structure. This is something very interesting. Now, yes, water vapor moves through the stomata of the leaf through the veins that we know, and absence of stomata. Yes, which are the plants which show or which have absence of stomata, where there's no stomata present at all? It's Hydrilla and Vallisneria. I have a question here. Great. Hydrilla and Vallisneria do not have a stomata. Very good. Okay, so that means we know because they are in the water. All right, great. That's fine. But then how do they perform photosynthesis? We said that carbon dioxide enters into the leaf through stomata. That is how the plant is able to perform photosynthesis. In this case of Hydrilla and Vallisneria, how is it that a plant is able to perform photosynthesis? Think about it. They don't have stomata. Then how? How is it that the plant is able to perform photosynthesis? Well, if you want to rack your brains further, it's okay. But otherwise, let me give you the answer. The answer lies here. Yes, it is because of the cuticle. Remember, I mentioned cuticle is seen, or cuticular transpiration is seen in certain, plants alone. And who are these certain plants? It is seen in aquatic plants. Yes, if you look at the classic example of cuticular transpiration, it is lotus. Lotus has got a very thick cuticle. and that is why it transpires like that. And apart from this, if you ask me, the carbon dioxide will enter into the body or into the leaf of these hydrophytes or aquatic plants because of the presence of this cuticle. So thanks to cuticle, that is how carbon dioxide enters into the body of aquatic plants. Okay. Coming to, oh, now don't get scared seeing this particular diagram. It looks very complicated, but it's not complicated. Trust me, it's not complicated. Okay, stomatal transpiration. This is how the tiny pore looks like. That very small tiny pore, that one small dot in the plant surface. Well, this is how it actually looks like. This is the transfer section of the leaf. This particular diagram is given in the NCERT textbook. Of course, it is not labeled very extensively like this, but I would always suggest that students draw this diagram and label it in this particular way. Okay, let's begin. If you're ready, I will start. Pay close attention. How does water move from xylem and comes to the stomata, and how does it leave the stomata? Pay attention very closely. Water from the xylem, can you look at these dots? Water from the xylem tissue or the xylem vessels enters immediately into these layer of cells which are called as mesophyll cells, and they enter from the xylem because xylem is also a cell. It enters into the mesophyll cell by the process of osmosis. We know cell to cell movement of water molecules is called as osmosis through a semi-permeable membrane. Now, in between cell to cell, mesophyll, one mesophyll to another mesophyll, or from here to here, cell to cell also will be osmosis. But if the cell comes in contact with an air space, always remember it is diffusion. Always remember, cell to cell is osmosis, cell with air space is always diffusion. Similarly, air to another cell is again diffusion. So from the air spaces, water enters, again I am repeating, water enters, let's say this is your xylem, water enters from xylem, goes up to the mesophyll cells. When it comes in contact with an air space, it diffuses over here, and from here again it enters into another mesophyll cell. So this could be again diffusion. From here it enters into a space. Can you see this big space here? Yeah, this big space over here is called substomatal space. I'm not writing the whole thing because it Israel doesn't come really neat. So please write it along as I am saying. This is called substomatal space. Substomatal space. Okay, so once it comes in contact with a substomatal space, again you can see it encounters the guard cell, and from the guard cell again through diffusion it comes out. So this is how it comes out through the stoma, again through diffusion. So very simple, not complicated at all. Don't make it complicated and do not unnecessarily lose marks here. You can score very easily if your terminologies are correct, if your keywords are written proper. And as I said, please answer questions, write your answers, learn to write answers, as a 10th standard student. Yes, your knowledge will be right. Everything is, information is right, but it has to be properly produced in the form of knowledge. So that you keep in mind. All right, coming to the last part of our session. Let me just erase this off. Yes, the last part of the PPT is about factors that are affecting photosynthesis. Let's talk about the different factors. We know that if there is increased light, there can be increased rate of photosynthesis. Same way, increased carbon dioxide can increase the rate of photosynthesis. Similarly, let's look at temperature. The temperature range has to be 25 to 35 degrees Celsius. Only then photosynthesis takes place appropriately or effectively. What if the temperature goes really high? What if the temperature touches 40? Then what happens in such cases? Well, you will see excessive transpiration takes place in such case and not photosynthesis. See, always remember that photosynthesis should be almost equivalent to transpiration. Almost. I'm not saying it should be exactly equal. It doesn't happen. but how much amount of water, the amount of glucose and everything, carbon dioxide and water that enters, equivalent amount of water should also leave. That's how a plant can be called a balanced plant. So in case if the temperature is really high, immediately transpiration increases. And in case of desert plants, they definitely don't have leaves to perform all these things. Yeah, they do have, they store water in the form of, yes, in their stem. That is like your phylloclade, or you can say your opuntia, cactus, they all do that particular thing. And that's where photosynthesis takes place. Let's look at water. Scarcity of water can lead to reduction in photosynthesis level, because less amount of water, less would be the photosynthesis level. I have another question. Please think of another factor, which is humidity. Think of humidity. Yeah, let's think of humidity. What do you think of humidity? What will happen if the plant is already in a humid condition, is living in a humid condition? What would happen in such a case? What would happen to the photosynthesis? Think about it, because I have put a question across for you to think and answer in those lines. Hope you have learned, these are the learning outcomes which can come out of it, and this is all what we have covered in this particular presentation, and these are your assignment questions. So these assignment questions should reach to me. Probably you should not take much time at all, in a day's time, 1 or 2 days maximum. Take time, and like I said, whatever is being taught, it's very essential that you also do your research, check on the net, find out resources related to the topic, get extra information, and make yourselves thorough with it. Don't leave it last minute. The moment topics are being taught in the class, or topics are being sent like this through videos and all that, make sure you are doing your part of the work. And if you are still further, I could say, if you are much more smarter, you would do the next topic before we could teach you, so that when we teach you, you can come up with doubts and you can come up with clarification. So just read through. It's not at all a complicated textbook. NCRT very explained so very, in a very simple language for students to understand. So it's definitely not going to be complicated at all. So answer these questions and get back to me in 1 or 2 days time, so that we could proceed with the next session also. These are the references. You can get extra information, as I was mentioning, through any of these websites if you browse and check. So hope you like this session, and hope to have another session with you very, very quickly. Thank you.